Shalom, shalom all. This is Mike Clark and David Ben Shul with UTOM Sharing. It's another journey, as we're going to talk about another journey of people coming to Torah or coming back to Torah or whatever you want to phrase that. I'm Mike Clark and our YouTube page is www.utom.org. David, say hello to everybody today.
Hello, everybody.
He's so obedient. I love it. He's so obedient.
Know, right?
Okay, so with any
okay.
Yeah, well, for any further ado, we got a special guest today, so I'm going to mute and turn this over to David, and he will introduce our guest, and we'll get on with it.
Yeah, before we get started, just want to say, please go to our website, because there you find out where our podcasts are, our YouTube channel, and of course, the website there has other information on it as well, kind of like who we are. But we're doing, like Mike said, another show today where we're going to be interviewing, well, sharing another journey from Rabbi Joel David Bakst. And he is from, he's in Israel. And we're very proud and very happy to have him here. And we're going to give him an opportunity to share his journey as well. Rabbi, I'm going to hand a rein over to you for the moment.
Thank you. I'm currently not in Israel. I lived in Israel for 20 years, and I was visiting a year ago, but currently I live in Colorado, in southern Colorado. But I usually feel like I am in Israel.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you've been in Colorado, southern part of Colorado. So you're near New Mexico.
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah, I know New Mexico really well, and I love the Sierra Nevada area, the forests. But anyway, you've had a story where you did your vow to Shuvah, and I was wondering if you could just share with that for a few minutes with us.
Sure. I grew up in Southern California in the late 60s and early 1970s. And I can say after the fact, I got the best of everything. That's when the culture itself was being influenced by Eastern Oriental concepts, yoga, Kundalini. I was exposed to the psychedelics. I was exposed to, activism and politics and thinking and philosophies, and that's what I was doing already at the age of 17, 18, and 19. And I went to Israel with a number of older friends, and we went there to work on a kibbutz. We signed up for 6 months, 6-month program. This was in 1972. But I had another reason I wanted to go. I wanted to learn the Kabbalah. Now, I barely knew at the time what the Kabbalah was. I certainly was not familiar with the true Jewish rabbinic Kabbalah. The only Kabbalah I had been exposed to was occult Kabbalah, Christian Kabbalah, the New Age Kabbalah, where it was a mixture of a lot of different things. And that's what got me going. I came from a non-religious background. It was called conservative Judaism. At that point, I was able to read Hebrew letters. I could not understand anything I was saying. And so I went there, and actually at the office where I signed up for the kibbutz in Tel Aviv, I asked the woman, by the way, where can I study Kabbalah? She knew, being Israeli, she knew what the word meant, but no such place existed, certainly not for English-speaking people. But I had to put that dream aside while I was working on the kibbutz. And 6 months later, I enrolled in a yeshiva. And I was part of the first big wave of the Baal Teshuvah movement. These were thousands and thousands of Anglos, Americans, Canadians, English, South African rather, and most of all these people were not religious in any sense of the word, but they were searching. I was coming from a very spiritually searching generation, and I fell into this yeshiva, and I began studying, and I ended up studying for altogether 20 years, basically day and night. At a certain point, I began teaching. And after I had developed the fundamentals of Talmudic learning, rabbinic thinking, halakha, how to render legal decisions, how that whole process operates, then I began my study of the Kabbalah with learning partners, with teachers, numerous teachers in Jerusalem. 1991, I came back here, and some years ago, I set up shop here in Southern Colorado, and ostensibly to start a community. And I was teaching regularly, and a lot of non-Jews started coming around. And essentially, I'd started my intent was to teach Jews, as I had been familiar with, and that's what I'd done in the past. But a lot of non-Jews started coming around, and over the years, I got involved in the Noahide movement. That was my first real serious exposure to it. I met Wendell Jones. In fact, I've been in his house, and I gave some classes there some years ago. And I was also involved in one of the first Noahide conferences that was held in Florida some years ago as well. And currently, I give classes. I have an online classroom. I have 4 books that I have published so far, the 5th one in the making. And students sit in on my classes, live classes through the internet. And I also have years and years of recordings of classes and courses that are available for purchase as well.
Wow, you've done a lot. Now, I'm just wondering, in your earlier part of your life, like you're saying, you were 17 and already you were starting to get more, you weren't religiously interested. It sounds like you were more of a spiritually interested. In other words, you're looking for something greater than what were you being taught in a synagogue? Like you said, you were in a conservative synagogue. Right?
That's correct. That's how I was raised. So I had basic familiarity. I had heard from my family I was related to someone called Gaon of Vilna. Didn't mean anything.
Really? Going to
time, and I then found out, doing more of the research, that I'm the 8th generation from the famed Gaon of Vilna, and it turned out that has become, over the decades, my main area of research and writing is the Kabbalah school of the Gaon of Vilna. It's almost virtually unknown, this school, outside of the inner Torah worlds. And even there, it's not studied as a school, a system.
It's sort of like more of a hearsay type of situation.
Yeah, well, no, the Gaon of Vilna is always quoted and referenced in individual study, him, of course.
Right.
But as a system of utilizing his methodology and his approach, as we were talking earlier, there's a methodology to Torah learning. There's a methodology to thinking. The most important thing for non-Jews and Jews to learn over the years is how to develop a Yiddish cup, which is Yiddish for a Jewish way of thinking and perceiving the world. And by being immersed in Jewish culture, you pick that up naturally. You study Talmud, you pick it up. What I have developed over the years is quite unique in that I'm able to take students, Jewish or non-Jewish, and over a number, just several years, if they really apply themselves, I teach conscious learning, which is that you are learning how to learn while you're doing the learning. In other words, it's not just the content, but it's also the context. The medium is the message, and the message is Torah, but one has to become initiated into the medium of the Torah, which is the mind of the rabbis, which I refer to as the mind of Moses. The mind of Moses is a collective consciousness of all the rabbis and sages, the Talmudic sage mystics, and the Kabbalists throughout the generations, that is really independent of place and time. It's a consciousness that travels with the Jewish people and anyone who has the proper training and methodology and proper reverence for who we're dealing with here. You can begin to get permission, so to speak, to sit in the back of the room and begin to listen in to these conversations that have been going on with the greatest minds on this planet for thousands of years, going all the way back from the Gaon of Vilna that I mentioned to Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, the Arizal from Spot 450 years ago, going back to Rabbi Akiva of the 2nd century, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, also of the 2nd century. Rabbi Akiva was actually a disciple of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and going all the way back to the prophets, to King Solomon, who's I consider one of my chief mentors, to learn his system, what was he really doing, and to begin to decode the 3 books of the Tanakh that he composed, which are Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, and the Song of Songs. And it goes back even further. I discovered not just to Moses at Mount Sinai, but of course to the patriarchs, the matriarchs, and even to Enoch, that most enigmatic, mysterious character of the Bible, Enoch.
You just mentioned my hero, so keep on.
Yeah. Well, these are the heroes to have. Okay, these are the real guys. This is where we have to get our modeling from, and that's another thing that I do in my teaching that is relatively unique. Of course, we go through all the later authorities and these master minds of the last several centuries, but I try to emphasize, take us back into the life and times of the Tanaim and the Amoraim. These are the sages who lived around the turn of the century, and then the 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd and 4th century. These are the guys. And by immersing ourselves in with them and following their daily adventures, not just as it's been extracted. Let's say there's a well-known expression, an aphorism everybody knows in Judaism. And even in the yeshiva world, you grow up learning a certain expression and what it means, usually according often to Rashi's explanation of it. However, if you follow that as a lead, not as an end in itself, it takes you back into the Talmud. And then you see how it was said originally in the context and of the different personalities that were involved in it. And you see a round table of discussions going on and the type of feedback they have with each other. I mean, we wouldn't call our best friends some of the names that they called each other, but it's not what it appears to be. It's like a bunch of guys hanging out who jokingly criticize each other. And if you didn't know, that they were best of friends and you're just walking by, it would be horrible, horrible. How could someone speak to another human being that way, especially when he claims his friend, and that's a rabbi you're talking that way? Because these are all geniuses. To get an idea of what one of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these sages were like, you take the three greatest minds that had the greatest effect upon the 20th century: Einstein, Marx, and Freud, okay? Which just happened to all be Jewish and all happened to be German, Austrian. And then you imagine putting all those minds together. That's a glimpse to begin to understand the mind of Moses as it has been transmitted through the Talmudic sage mystics.
Yes, very well put. That whole idea of the context, getting to the mind of the people, I feel is so important, and it's lacking. I know a lot of times I'll learn about something. I said, well, that's interesting that they taught it, but what about this person, that person? And walking your way back all the way to Moshe. The conversation and taking it back. My grandfather's favorite man that he taught me to love and respect was Shlomo, was Solomon, King Solomon. And he always taught me from Book of Ecclesiastes was his favorite book. And so he would always bring that out to me. And I learned that cyclical thinking from my grandfather, where, yeah, there's time for war, there's a time for peace, and understanding in context why that's the case.
That's wonderful.
But if you short circuit it, you don't get the breadth of that knowledge and the wisdom that's really there. And that's why I like what you're talking about. Excuse me, I got a dog running around. Talking about I forgot what I was going to say.
The mode of transmission.
Yeah.
And
yes.
We don't call Moses is called Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses, our teacher. And that's not just, lip service. We have to make him our teacher, our instructor, our mentor. But we have to be patient to learn the language. It's all about language. That's what I teach. I teach the language of the Torah, the language of the sages. And that is inseparable from the language of the Kabbalah. Most people do not understand. Kabbalah is not Jewish mysticism. It can play that role, and certainly has, but more importantly, Kabbalah is referred to by the Kabbalists themselves as Chachmat HaEmet, which means the wisdom or the science of truth. More specifically, how to ascertain truth. And that's a methodology. There's an operating system to the Torah, which is very shocking and surprising, because it seems anyone who begins to engage Torah, it's like all over the place. You got a jigsaw puzzle that's made out of hundreds of thousands of pieces. And so the first thing you have to do is you got to get that backboard, that's got all the little grooves in it, to know where to start putting the pieces. And it's only after you start putting some of these pieces together, using the methodology, you can begin to see some of the panoramic image that jigsaw puzzle is really coming to tell you about.
How long does it take a person to start getting into the groove? I know there's different degrees of it, but somebody's saying, hey, I just want to start learning this.
Doesn't take more than 3 lifetimes.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. So yes. It's a good thing that Gilgal is in place.
Yes. It's really virtually on the surface impossible. I often look at my students when I'm writing something, and I realize I'm writing this with the knowledge that took me 20 years and more. I've been studying Torah now for 45 years. And I feel so frustrated and so much empathy for those that do not have that background, and they're never going to get it, not in this lifetime, especially if we're older. And so that is why I developed my system, which is my rabbi, my Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Mordechai Goldstein, passed away a few years ago. He was a master of Talmudic methodology. He was a Talmudic of rabbinical thinking, as well as with Musar. Musar is ethical character development. And he claimed, now he studied with his Rosh Yeshiva, his Rebbe, for 20 years. And he claimed that he had honed the system down and distilled it where he could take someone with little to no background. And in 5 years, if he used a specific methodology, you could become a learned person, a minor scholar in your own right, just after 5 years. In other words, we're talking about compressing 10, 15, 20 years into that 5-year period. Now, there's no way someone's going to have the breadth, okay, of knowledge of Torah. But I come from a tradition where we emphasize iyun, that is in-depth learning, exegesis, if you will, where our preference is to learn how to dig deep as opposed to learning how to get a lot of facts and information. Of course, you have to know that. You have to have your backboard. You have to have your frame. However, you gain more, you get a closeness to Hashem. When you start digging into Torah, it's like archaeology. You dig down layers and layers and layers. And that's when the Torah really starts to come alive. And now you're digging into becoming a part, if only a cell, in the mind of Moses.
Wow. That's fantastic. Now, do you find sometimes people will come in and it's almost like they have an instinct for Kabbalah? Or
Yes,
instinct for
that's an excellent question you're asking. It's something I have been acutely aware of over the decades. My first assumption in my naivety was that, hey, I'm a regular intelligent person. I got a lot of Torah background. I study the Kabbalah. I see these things. I start talking in this language. And I start talking to my colleagues and to other teachers. I start reading what other Torah scholars are saying and what they're doing. And when I would say, even on a personal level, approach one, ask certain questions, it would like draw a blank, or I could see they were uncomfortable with that, even though they could know much more Torah knowledge than myself. They would be an acclaimed Torah scholar, but what I learned through trial and error, Kabbalah, let's start with this. The soul is not a single thing. The soul is a spectrum. You've got a nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida, the 5 levels of the soul. And one thing I learned from the Arizal, he explained that it's what you're attracted to in Torah depends upon where your shorish neshama, the root of your soul, where you're rooted in. And some souls are rooted in, let's say, the lower dimension called asiya. And they can become masters of their field, let's say, of scripture. They love scripture. They love learning the weekly parsha, with Rashi. And they even go and they learn Tanakh. But they don't have, they may know basic Talmud, but they don't have any kind of thirst or passion to learn Talmud. On the other hand, there are those that go crazy for Talmud. I did too for many, many, many years. But scripture, they get by with what they need to know. They're not drawn towards it. Others are drawn to halakha, Jewish law. They're like, at heart, they're a lawyer. They love the minutia and the details, and that's how they come close to God. I know. I've been there, done that. And I have tremendous reverence for that approach. But then there are those who they're drawn towards the Kabbalah, which is simply the soul of the Torah. Your body has all these different layers to it. And that's why different doctors, after they go through basic medical school, they then specialize in this area or that area. Same thing in Torah, it's no different. Once we understand and that the word Kabbalah does not mean mysticism. Unfortunately, that's how it's often referred to, even by those that teach Kabbalah, referred to it as Jewish mysticism. That's from my perspective, and that's what I teach, that's virtually a taboo word to call it mysticism, because what you're doing is you're separating out this highest level of the soul from the rest of the parts of the soul and the body. And so unless someone has their root, it's called Atzilut, the highest level in the Kabbalah spectrum of dimensions, if they're not rooted in there, they will not be drawn towards it. Furthermore, they might have a disdain for it. They might feel, oh, that's mysticism, that's not Orthodox Judaism. At best, they will honor it, and they may even have some classic Kabbalah books in their home library, but they will be placed on the highest shelf. They're honoring it and revering it, but it's never touched or opened. It's out of reach. And so that's the important thing to understand, especially in the more general universal world of Torah. You can be attached to Torah, to its garments. You can be attached to Torah to its skin. You can be attached to Torah for its inner physiology and biology, and you can be attached to Torah to its soul. Now, truth be told, it's very important, you cannot. There's no concept of Kabbalah and Torah if you are not familiar, if not having even mastered all the other levels and layers of the Torah.
Okay, so I know, like for myself, and I think Mike may be even in the same boat, I always like to dig and find out why something is. I've always been the type of person, I know what I believe and why I believe it. And if I need to modify or change things, I know why I need to change things or to modify things accordingly. And I've been taught that sometimes I'll make a mistake and I got to take a step back. That's okay. That's all part of the process. Now, I like to look at the why force. So, like, I look at the written Torah and I try to get into, and I mean this at a lower level, you know, after debate, is try to understand what's in Bereshit, of what's in God's mind or the Creator's mind, not His essence, but I'm trying to get, okay, why does He want us to do this? I know there's some things we can't do that with, but I've always been like looking into like the metaphysicalness of why was the Torah written this way? Why does it say this or that? And
David, I'll take that even further. The most important thing in learning Torah is the kasha question, the difficulty, okay? We encourage, we require difficulties because that's where you're making a little X to dig in. You may not be able to dig in then and there. You may have to wait until you have more background and methodology, but Torah loves kashas. A kasha is the Hebrew for a difficulty. It's something that's hard, okay, a question. And it's, so there are the system that I teach, this is what I have discovered after doing this for many, many decades. It's only for 1 out of 1,000, which is fine. Meaning, I mean, how many people become doctors? How many become specialists in this area? Okay, I'm talking about people that are drawn to the Torah, Okay, we're not even talking about anyone outside of that circle. Okay, and that out of those 1,000 that are, say, drawn to the Torah, okay, it's only going to be in the end the one out of the 1,000 that will have this propensity to search for the light at the end of the tunnel, no matter what. And really, you don't have a choice. Okay, if this is your soul and you hear a calling, and it's the mind of God that's calling, then you have no choice to become virtually a neuron in the brain of the divine.
Exactly.
And so it's along those lines that what I have done, I have a different starting point. Noahides start with Noah, the 7 commandments of the children of Noah. Torah, Jews begin in general with Mount Sinai, the revelation of the Torah. Now, of course, you can move backwards to the patriarchs, you can move forward. Okay, same thing Ben Noah can do. You start with Noah, that's your homepage. You can go before that, you can go after that. Mount Sinai is definitely the homepage for mainstream, orthodox, traditional, Torah true Judaism. However, I use a different homepage. We can access all those others. The homepage is Adam in the Garden of Eden. That's the homepage. And that unexpectedly draws a common denominator between Sinai for the Jews and Noah, for the non-Jews, because this is what both of those are branching out from Adam. And it's in that context that next year, in the first week of June, in the year 2020, there's going to be the first Adamic Messiah conference. What is that? Well, the Mashiach who comes at the end is really the original Adam at the beginning. I am the first and I am the last. Now, the problem is the Adam we're talking about is a higher dimensional consciousness.
Yes.
I was just thinking earlier today to myself, there's a lyric to a song written by John Lennon in the 70s. It wasn't as popular as a lot of his other songs, but the lyric went, God is a concept by which we measure our pain. Okay, now that sounds really deep, but that's actually very not Jewish. It's only partial. Rather, God is a concept by which we measure consciousness. God, the term God, we can get rid of any associations we have with it, whatever our background is, Christian, Jewish, anything. We're just going to use the term. When I use the term God, it's how we calibrate, how we measure God's consciousness, of which we are a part of. Now, that's why, in fact, it's the first International Adamic Conference, and it's titled The Kabbalah of Science and the Adamic Code. The Kabbalah of Science is what I have discovered. To utilize modern science in a unique way, particularly 7 tools from the modern sciences, concepts such as dimensionality, topology, holography, fractal geometry, quantum logic, and the shape of the torus, what I found is these are all the basic principles of Kabbalah, which is the foundation of the Torah. In other words, and this goes back to what we just mentioned, there's no way you can master enough Torah to dig in and to really develop that intimate relationship with the divine. But what I found is by using these 7 tools, along with any other tools, there's a principle. No vessels, no light. Science are the vessels for the light of the Torah. No vessels, no light, no models, no insight. we have to find the models to understand the Kabbalah, because it's a language. And the subtitle of the conference is A New Language for Our Transition into the Messianic Era. According to the system, the Kabbalah school of the Gaon of Vilna, contrary to most understandings, we're already in it. For real. It's already interfacing. And one of the things in my books that I do is I document how there's different stages, and we are in a certain stage of the Messianic era. And when we study that, then it starts to explain all the bizarre phenomenon that's happening around us, and that's accelerating at unprecedented, unimaginable speeds. Because, yes.
Yeah, well, I wanted to say, when Mike and I studied the Zohar, we were reading a page towards the beginning where it talks about the, what was I going to say? I'm drawing another blank. And why am I drawing a blank on this?
Okay, I'll draw something on a blank board.
Yeah, because you're talking about how with the atom, and
it all comes down to Adam. Okay,
right.
And the story of the Garden of Eden, we have to overhaul it and realize this is a story of dimensionality. If we don't calculate the fall of Adamic consciousness, which it's a collapse, it's a paradigm dimensional collapse of consciousness. If we don't start there, there's no way we can even begin to glimpse what Mashiach is, because Mashiach is the original Adam. And this is what all the sages of the Torah keep teaching and emphasizing. However, because we've been living in the Western world for so long, without realizing it, we have adapted non-Jewish, non-Torah, non-Kabbalah modes of thinking. And this is why then the Kabbalah appears so strange to some people. It's because it's a different language. And we have to relearn that language. The first thing that comes with the Messianic era is a new language, as it's expressed in that verse from Zephaniah.
Yeah, here's what I was going to say. We're reading about the world to come, and we always think of that in the future tense. But in reality, it could be the world that is coming, the world that's in the process of evolving and coming. And
That's
I think
absolutely correct. The Zohar and the Sefer Bahir goes even further.
Yeah,
it points out there's something strange with the grammar of Olam Haba, because the word Haba is in the present tense. When someone comes to your door in Hebrew, Israel, you say Baruch Haba. Blessed is the one who has come, who's here, right here in front of me. And so it was asked rhetorically, why is it called the world, the dimension? To come? No, it's the dimension that's already here, because we're inside of it. Because originally there was, and this is why dimensionality is so crucial to understand this. We live in a world of 3 dimensions, okay? A line, a square. You take 6 squares, you get a cube. Okay, that's 3 dimensions. Well, originally we had a 4th dimension, a 4th direction, a 4th coordinate. And I refer to that as 4D, 4-dimensionality, and it can be represented by a hypercube as opposed to simply a cube. Okay, Adam and Chava and the Nachash, the serpent, all this is taking place in a higher 4th dimension, because something went wrong, a horrendous, catastrophic miscalculation on the level of horror science fiction story. Okay, we fell down into a lower dimension. We are the original Adam, but we now became Homo sapiens, when really we are the higher dimensional Adam. When Mashiach comes, that is the original Adam. We're all going to return to the body of Adam. We're all going to be cells in the body of Adam. And the diversity of the world is still going to be there, except the diversity will be, oh, this nation is this organ in the body of Adam. This nation is this organ. This person is a cell in this tissue. And these are the neurons in the brain, and these are the cells in the bottom of the foot. Now, of course, when we're talking about the body of Adam, there's nothing to see. It's higher dimensional. The problem, the only prohibition of studying Kabbalah is this: to know the limitations of your own mind, your own consciousness.
Right.
As long as you know anything you see is going to be a projection, an anthropomorphic projection, as long as you know that, then it's okay. But if you forget that and you think what you're seeing or imagining is the absolute, that's where then all the red lights go on and warning, warning, beware, don't enter, for your own good.
Fascinating.
So it's about it, David. It's about a new language, and that's what this conference is essentially about. As I was mentioning that verse from Zephaniah, where it says, "I will then transform to the nations a pure language." That is the language. That's Messianic language, which is really the language of the Kabbalah, which is the true language of the Torah. And when you study Talmud through the eyes of the Kabbalah, when you study Halakha, what you thought was a legal little detail, when it's viewed from a higher dimension, oh my gosh, we're dealing with higher dimensional consciousness, and you thought it was just a little custom that the Jewish people are doing, or the Pharisaic rabbis are getting involved in how many angels can fit on the head of a pin. Not when you're in the higher dimension.
You're reminding me of a class I had in college, which was called semantics. And in that semantics class, we learn that we think according to what we speak, according to the language that we know. And he was teaching us how to try to raise ourselves out of that, so we have a greater expanse in our understanding, which we may not be able to verbalize. So I'm thinking about, you're talking about this language that's being given to people. It's the language, like you say, the Messiah. It's the thought of the Messiah. It's the motive of the individual, all coming together. I mean, there is a science even behind that. What
Yes,
you just said.
It's all science, and what is about to happen when Mashiach comes. I mean, after you say your initial, shalom, how are you going to talk to the Messiah? How is he going to talk to you when he's using the equivalent of a higher four-dimensional language? Furthermore, not only will we not be able to talk to the Messiah, we will not be able to talk to each other, because reality is about to be transformed, literally down to the molecular level. This is like the elephant in the middle of the room that nobody is addressing. We're worried about Gog and Magog. We're worried about the apocalypse. We're worried about World War III. And yes, we're not saying no, okay? However, that will be the least of our problems, because if, God forbid, someone's being destroyed in a war, at least you still have your physical reality around you. But what happens when reality starts to pixelate? That's what we're in for. And that's why we have to begin with the language to begin to prepare. And we're all going to be hit by this tsunami of viscous light of Adam's original consciousness. The difference will be this: those that don't know what's hitting them, as their consciousness gets dispersed with light years in between every molecule, will be the release of light will be so powerful that will be their death. Yes, they're going to die in a gasp of ecstasy, but you're going to be missing all the good stuff. So those few of us that can prepare to learn the language, we're going to be hit by the same light, but at least you go, oh, that's what that is. And then your consciousness will be reconstituted.
Right. Exactly. And reconstitute also on a higher level.
Absolutely.
Because our consciousness is what derives our reality versus our self-constructed reality.
Yes. Now we know this. This is a fact for 100 years now with quantum mechanics. One of the foundational principles is that our consciousness is defining the reality around us and in us. That consciousness affects reality. That's why
Yes.
in the Garden of Eden, which is a code name for a coordinate in the Godhead, okay?
Okay.
In that coordinate, the now I lost my track of thought. See, yeah, and that makes
It's
you
not
feel
just
better. Yeah, what was I saying?
You're talking about the Garden of Eden being that marker, being that.
Yes.
Coordinate.
Yeah.
Yes. That the Garden of Eden is a coordinate of higher consciousness. On that level, there's no distinction between consciousness and reality. It's
Right.
consciousness / reality. That's what we're going back into.
Wow.
And that's why the way the world is going, there's nothing that can really be done to stop it. Okay, we're going down in like a funnel, a whirlpool, and it's going faster and faster. Everything's getting squished together more and more and more. But what we can do, we can begin to alter our consciousness. And then the consciousness that there's enough humans using Messianic consciousness, we
Right.
can do the impossible, the unbelievable, the unimaginable. We can actually start to transform the malleability of three-dimensionality. In other words, Gog and Magog, for example, it's a reality. It has to happen. The question is, will it happen in three-dimensionality, or will we experience it in four-dimensionality? And if we experience that in four-dimensionality, not only is it not the horror, that everyone is so afraid of, understandably, not only will not be the horror, it will be transformed into explosions of ecstasy, of pure consciousness, because we're going back to Adam before the fall, before the collapse. That's the Messiah. That's why I coined the term the Adamic Messiah. You have to loop it back in. We're not going to an end like a finishing line. We're looping back to the very, very beginning, and we're picking up where Adam left off.
Mike and I started something called the Genesis Walk, and it all started because one day I was looking at Genesis 2 and the beginning of 3, and I started noticing a very peculiar thing taking place. It almost looked like it was levels of consciousness that were taking place, where we saw Adam, and then we saw male and female being made. Not Adam and Eve, but male and female. And then after that, then it was Adam and Eve, and then eventually they became Homo sapiens. They ate the fruit, and they saw it was good. So I was like, wow, I'm seeing a progression here of Adam stepping down, so eventually the Homo sapien here can have a soul. And I saw that and was like, holy mackerel. So when you talk about the Adamic, or the Messiah, going back to Adam in the beginning, I can see you're right. It's we have to progress up that ladder of consciousness.
Yes.
In order to bring a completeness back to the picture.
Yes.
Wow,
we've gone through a devolution of consciousness.
Yeah.
And we're not evolving. That's why
Yeah.
As we got into the 20th century, should have been, we're evolving beyond our primitiveness and wars and hatred and all that stuff. That hasn't changed. Okay? And it cannot change. This is an important thing to know. We cannot produce a three-dimensional utopia on this planet in this state. It's not possible, not because we're not good enough, not because we're not smart enough, not because we're not clever enough. It's due to the dimension that we are in. This is not our true home.
Right.
And the Gan Eden is the porthole to the true home. That's why my website, which is cityofluz, LUZ.com, most people, even Torah people, don't know that when the place where Jacob had his dream vision, okay, in the morning when he got up, he gave this place a name called Beit El, okay, house
Right.
of God. And he said, this is the Shar HaShemayim, this is the gate, the portal, the star gate to the higher dimension. And he says, but formerly the place was called Luz. Making a very long story
That's
short,
right.
Luz, L-U-Z, is
Yeah.
another code name for Beit El, the gate to heaven, and that is the gate back into the Garden of Eden. When King Solomon built the first temple, he built it, the Holy of Holies, built on what's called the foundation stone, Evan Shtia. Okay, that is the stone where the binding of Isaac took place with Abraham. That's where Jacob's dream was. That is where the Ark of the Covenant with the two golden cherubim stood. That is a vortex. That is why all the nations of the world want to destroy it and take it away from Klal Yisrael, who are the guardians of the temple. And it is that place that is known as Luz, and then this connects us, this hyperlinks us to this whole strata throughout the Talmud, the Midrash, and the Zohar, and the Kabbalists. They keep talking about something called the Luz bone, or the Luz essence. This is all alluding to that spot that is the vortex between 3D and 4D. That is, in effect, where Adam and Chava fell out. That's where they have that was their exit, but the way out is the way back in. As it says, the two cherubim were placed at the entrance to the Garden of Eden to guard Derech Eitz Chaim, to guard the path, the way back to the tree of life. It is meant to keep out those that are not meant to go in, but at the same time, it's meant to be a clear pathway for those that are worthy and fitting and know the methodology of how to go back in. And that is the entrance back into the higher dimensional Garden of Eden. Garden is a code term. Eden is a code term. These are all taking place in the higher dimensional body, as it were, of what's also called Adam Kadmon, the archetypal Adam, primordial Adam, which is simply the soul of Adam Harishon, of Adam the first. He is the body to Adam Kadmon. Something went weird happened, like out of horror science fiction. We now are the body for the soul of Adam Harishon. So we have to get ourselves back to Adam. We really are Adam, but we're the edge of Adam that got, this kind of spiritual virus got in, and it's feeding off of the host of the life force of Adam. And that's what's happening now. That with Gog and Magog and all the nations against Israel, it's all playing out because Gog and Magog is well known as Gematria 70 equals the number 70. This is the archetypal nations of the world. Noah had 70 grandchildren. It's
amazing that we read in chapter 3 where we see Adam and Chava, or Adam and Chava, end up following the serpent, and yet at the end of that, God says, no, you're going to eat the dust of the earth. It's almost like the serpent was used to entice the soul into mankind just so that mankind could be rescued from the serpent in the big picture.
In the big picture.
In the big picture,
yeah.
not instantaneous.
So many things going on. That's why I encourage, I really believe anyone coming into Torah, certainly non-Jews, you need to be studying the first chapters of Genesis.
Absolutely.
Make that your home page. You go
Yep.
everyplace else, but always at the end of the day, you come back to your home page.
Exactly.
Adam, that story is trying to communicate to us. The problem is there's a dimensional chasm now, an ontological gap between Adam and the part of himself that fell out. He cannot even communicate to his own self any more than a hypercube can communicate to a cube, or a cube to a square to a line.
Yeah.
The story of the Garden of Eden is a story about dimensionality. It's about
Right.
higher and lower dimensionality. That's why, that's where we have to start. And then, little by little, with the proper methodology, everything else will fall into place.
Wow.
And we will begin to wake up, not as ourselves, but as the Adamic Messiah
Right.
himself. We are
Wow.
cells, neurons in his body, in his brain. This is what's taking place now. And we're on the edge, where I call it the lip of time is about to flip. Imagine we've been traveling along a glass tube, okay? You come to the edge. And the edge is thicker than the glass, right? Well, we're about to, if we were traveling, let's say, on the inside of the tube, we're now about to flip like a rubber band on the outside. Okay, but if you magnify the edge, it has an ascension and a descension. It's an apex, right? So we have already gone up the ascent until approximately around 1990. We're now on the descent, meaning we've already started to flip, and we're about to emerge on the other side of reality. And we'll be startled beyond belief to realize this whole entire reality, all of its history and our personal lives and everything, including dinosaurs and geological time and cosmic time, it was all the backside of the true picture. Adam fell into his own backside, as it were. It's horror science fiction, but hey, why not? Why is all this happening? The science fiction and the movies and parallel worlds and interstellar and time tunnels through space and time. Why are we all being programmed with that now in our generation? It's to give us the tools to begin to understand what's about to happen. And by comparison, as I was saying, Gog and Magog and the apocalypse, whatever it will be, let it be. But it's nothing compared to what's about to really happen.
Wow.
David, we are an hour into this. I mean, I'm fine. I'm good. We can go on all night as far as I'm concerned. I'm just giving you a time of where we're at.
Well, what I was thinking is maybe we should stop here, and please share that conference again, and also your website or where they can find this information for themselves, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people saying, "Oh, I need to hear this."
Yes, again, it's the first international Adamic conference, the Kabbalah of Science and the Adamic Code, a new language for our transition into the Messianic era. I will be presenting, a number of my students and colleagues will be presenting, that have all adapted to greater and lesser extent the Adamic Code. We know it's about Mashiach and it's a consciousness. And these are other people that have become part of this whole approach and methodology. My website, again, is cityofluz.com. There you can get an overview of what I teach. My books are up on Amazon. Look under my name, Joel Bakst, B-A-K-S-T. And they are the volumes 1 and 2 of The Secret Doctrine of the Gaon of Vilna, which is the basis for everything that we've been discussing so far. I have another book called The Jerusalem Stone of Consciousness, which is all about the luz bone, the luz essence, the pineal gland, and the current interest and obsession in the world with a neurotransmitter that is produced in the brain called dimethyltryptamine, DMT, which is also the main ingredient in a Amazonian brew called ayahuasca. It's something that's produced naturally in the brain. And this is part of the prophecies that are found in the book of Ezekiel, the book of Joel, and the book of Zechariah, that when we begin entering into the true Messianic era, there's going to begin a liquid that's going to start seeping out of the foundation stone, which is underneath the Golden Dome, under basically Muslim rule right now. That is the foundation stone, and it's called Mayim Chayim. It is living liquid, living waters. That is what is going to begin to affect all human consciousness, okay? And my fourth book is called Beyond Kabbalah, and that's all the methodology that I've alluded to, where it's written as a manual, as a guidebook. And essentially, if a person goes through that 3 times well, they will be a miniature Torah scholar in their own right. Well, they will have the basic language of the Kabbalah, and they will have Messianic consciousness.
Awesome, awesome. I do got to wrap this up. However, just stay on. I want to thank you so much, Rabbi Baxter, for being here. I am floored because this is like, I cannot talk.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because this stuff has been on my mind for years.
I know. It's been on my mind for years too. And I can empathize very, very, very well, intimately, with what you're experiencing right now, David. I've been going through this for decades, David, decades. And as I would get closer and closer, and it became more clear and more clear. So this conference is the first time this is being revealed to the world at large, aside from in my books. Time has come. I just want to conclude by saying that there's a well-known verse in Malachi that says, "Behold, I am sending Elijah the prophet to announce to you before the great and awesome day." This is part of what Elijah is announcing. It's just the language. We can't even begin to grasp what Mashiach, what the Messianic era and beyond is about without the language. So we accept. It's like you're going to learn a whole new language for the first time. It can be done. I have students that are coming from going from 0 to 1,000. I have Torah scholars that I teach as well that are in their own way going from 0 to 1,000 because it's a completely different language. Even though you realize, oh my gosh, that's what the Tanaim, the Amoraim, all the sages, they're talking this language. This is the real language of Torah and Judaism.
Mike, we might as well close down now.
Well, thank you all. And Rabbi Bakst, thank you so much for sharing. I knew this was going to be a great show, and I thank you for sharing your time. And again, www.utom.org is our website, and that's where we have all of our journeys. We do have a Facebook page also. We're so blown right now. Just go to the webpage, check it out. And again, until next time, have a great week, and shalom, shalom. Thank you.
Shalom, shalom.